ever get the feeling that like getting software out the door and getting it out the door fast, it's like this impossible magic trick?
Yeah, it kind of feels like that sometimes, right?
Yeah, and just like keeping up with all the ways that we like build and release software these days, it feels like a job in itself, honestly.
Yeah, it definitely can.
So today we are going to be talking all about testing and DevOps, and this is really just like your backstage pass into how modern software teams actually manage to like juggle both of those things, speed and quality at the same time.
Yeah, we're going to be pulling back the curtain.
Exactly. And we have a whole bunch of super interesting material that we're going to go over today, and it's all about like how testing fits into this whole DevOps like philosophy and way of working.
We're going to try to extract the core principles behind integrating testing into DevOps.
Yeah, and why it actually like matters for creating software that's not just efficient but also reliable. Like you as a user, you want to know that the app you're using isn't going to crash every 5 seconds.
For sure, it has to actually work.
Right, exactly. Okay, so let's get down to it. When we say DevOps, like what are we even talking about?
Well, at its core, it's really about bringing together two worlds that used to be pretty separate.
Yeah, like traditionally they were totally separate.
Exactly. And those are the people who write the software.
Mm.
So your development teams.
Right, the coders, the programmers.
Exactly. And the people who run it and keep it going. So your IT operations folks.
Like the system administrators.
Yeah, and DevOps is all about merging these two worlds to make the whole process smoother and faster.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about things like more automation, more collaboration between teams, and ultimately getting new features and updates out to users much more quickly.
So really when we think about DevOps, we're thinking about the whole life cycle of the software. It's not just about writing the code, it's about getting it out there into the world in a reliable way.
Yeah, it's about the entire journey. And a fundamental part of that journey is this concept of continuous testing.
Okay, so continuous testing.
Yeah.
So what is that, like how is that different from just regular old testing?
Right, so if you're listening, the key thing to understand here is that continuous testing is a real mind shift in how we think about ensuring software quality.
Like it's not just slapping a tested sticker on it at the end, right?
Exactly. We're not talking about doing all your testing at the very end anymore.
Which honestly sounds kind of stressful, like waiting till the last minute to make sure everything works.
Yeah, it is kind of like building an entire car and then taking it for a test drive for the very first time right before you try to sell it.
Oh, that is a terrifying thought, yeah.
Right, so continuous testing, on the other hand, is about testing constantly throughout the entire process. It's like testing the brakes after you install them, checking the engine after you put it in. Basically every step of the way, you're making sure things are working.
So it's more like ongoing quality control.
Exactly. And two key things make this constant testing possible within DevOps.
Yeah, what are those two things?
First, we've got strong collaboration between those Dev and Ops teams. Remember, they're not working in isolation anymore.
Right, they're like one big happy family now.
Well, ideally. And the second key thing is automation. We're talking about automating as much of the testing process as possible.
Okay, so getting computers to do the boring, repetitive stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Free up the humans to focus on more complex things. And this is where you hear about things like CI and CD, continuous integration and continuous deployment.
Right, CI/CD. I've heard those terms thrown around a lot.
Think of them as automated pipelines that take code changes and get them ready to be released.
Like an assembly line for software.
Yeah, and continuous testing is what makes sure everything flowing through those pipelines is actually working correctly.
It's like the quality control checkpoints along that assembly line.
Exactly. So for you, the listener, what does this all mean?
Yeah, like why should we care about all this continuous testing stuff?
Well, the biggest benefit is that it helps catch errors early on.
Which is always a good thing, right? I mean, the sooner you find a mistake, the easier it is to fix.
Absolutely. Imagine you're building a house. You wouldn't want to wait until the entire house is built to realize that the foundation is cracked.
Oh, that's a nightmare scenario.
Right. It's much easier and cheaper to fix a crack in the foundation than it is to rebuild the entire house.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So continuous testing is all about finding those cracks early on before they become major problems.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, let's go back to that banking app example from our research.
Yeah, the banking app.
Imagine a new feature gets added that accidentally creates a security loophole.
Oh, that's not good.
If testing only happens at the very end, that flaw could be live and vulnerable for days, maybe even weeks, potentially affecting a lot of users.
People's money could be at risk.
Exactly. But with continuous testing, automated security checks are happening constantly as that feature is being built, so that flaw gets flagged almost immediately. The developers can fix it right away, and ideally it never reaches anyone using the app.
So it's like having a security guard on duty 24/7.
Yeah, that rapid feedback loop is super valuable.
Okay, so we get that testing moves earlier in the process with DevOps, and it happens way more often. But let's really unpack how it becomes like baked into the way software is built. Like it's not just about testing sooner, it's a change in mindset, right?
It absolutely is. In DevOps, testing isn't seen as this isolated task that a separate team handles at the end.
Right, it's not like throwing it over the wall to testing department.
Exactly. It's really viewed as a shared responsibility that's built into every stage of the software's life, from the initial planning all the way through to when it's running live.
So it's like everyone's responsible for quality.
Yeah, and this is where the ideas of shifting left and shifting right come in.
Shifting left and right, those sound like dance moves.
Kind of, but in this context, shifting left is all about moving testing activities earlier in the development timeline, even to the point of writing tests before you write the actual code.
So you're thinking about testing from the very beginning.
Exactly. It's about being proactive about quality, and then there's shifting, right, which is equally important.
Yeah.
This means extending testing and monitoring into the environment where the software is actually running and being used by people, what we call post-production.
So even after the software is released, you're still testing.
Exactly. You're actively monitoring its performance, looking for any issues, and gathering feedback that can inform future improvements.
So it's like a continuous feedback loop from the real world.
Precisely. And this collaborative spirit is key in a DevOps setup. You'll often see developers, testers, and operations folks all working together to build these automated test suites.
So it's a real team effort.
It is. Everyone's focused on making sure the software is high quality at every stage.
Okay, that makes sense. You've got different skills and perspectives all contributing to building a more resilient system.
Right. And speaking of different perspectives, let's talk about the different types of testing that are part of DevOps, because it's not just one type of test that covers everything.
No, definitely not. It's like a whole toolkit of different tests.
It's exactly. So you've got unit testing, which is all about testing the smallest individual pieces of code, individual functions, or little building blocks.
Like making sure each brick is strong before you build the whole wall.
Yeah, a good analogy. Then there's API testing, which focuses on checking how different software components communicate with each other. Think of it as testing the connections between different apps on your phone to make sure they can share data correctly.
Right, so making sure all the different parts of the software can talk to each other without any misunderstandings.
Precisely then, you have performance testing, which is crucial for making sure the software can handle the expected number of users and remains responsive even when things get busy.
Like making sure the website doesn't crash when a million people try to access it at the same time.
Exactly. And of course, security testing, which is all about finding potential weaknesses and making sure the software is protected against security threats.
So we've got unit testing, API testing, performance testing, security testing. It sounds like a lot to keep track of.
It is, but that's where the power of automation comes in. Remember, we talked about automating as much of the testing process as possible.
Right. And how does that work in practice?
Think about companies like Amazon or Netflix. They deploy code thousands of times a day.
Thousands. That's insane.
Yeah, and that speed is only possible because they've invested heavily in automating all these different types of tests and integrating them into their CI/CD pipelines.
So every time a developer makes a change, it triggers a whole bunch of automated tests.
Exactly. It's like having a robot army of testers working around the clock.
Okay, so that's how they manage to release updates so frequently.
It is. And for you listening, if you're interested in seeing faster, more reliable software updates, this integrated and automated approach to testing is essential.
So continuous testing isn't just some nice to have, it's like the key to unlocking faster and better software.
It is. But making this shift to continuous testing isn't always easy. There's some challenges that teams often encounter.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those challenges. Like, what are some of the roadblocks that teams might face?
Well, the first hurdles is maintaining those fast feedback loops we discussed earlier.
Right, because if the testing process itself slows everything down, then what's the point?
Exactly. The challenge is that as software grows, the number of tests can explode. Running every single test for every little code change can create a bottleneck.
So how do you keep the feedback loop fast without sacrificing thoroughness?
There are a few key strategies. One is test prioritization. This means figuring out which tests are the most important, the ones that are most likely to catch critical issues, and making sure those run first.
So it's like triage for software testing.
Yeah, a good way to put it, another technique is parallel execution, which means running multiple tests simultaneously.
So instead of running them one after another, you run them all at the same time.
Exactly. This requires having enough computing power, but it can drastically reduce the overall testing time.
It's like having multiple chefs working in the kitchen instead of just one.
And finally, using containerized test environment can be really helpful. Containers provide isolated and self-contained environments for running tests.
So it's like having a bunch of little mini labs where you can run your tests.
Exactly. Which makes it much faster to set up and tear down those environments.
Okay, so be smart about which tests you run and make sure you run them efficiently. That makes sense. What's another common challenge?
Another big one is choosing the right automation tools. You might find that different teams within a company have their own favorite testing tools.
Which can cause problems, right?
You can imagine trying to get a bunch of musicians to play together when they all have different instruments that are tuned differently.
That would be a very chaotic orchestra.
Exactly. So the solution is to try to standardize on a common set of testing frameworks across the company.
So everyone's playing from the same sheet music.
Exactly. And our sources mention some popular examples like Selenium for testing web applications, JNet for unit testing, and Java Cypress for front-end testing, and JMeter for performance testing.
So those are some of the big names in the testing world.
They are. And by agreeing on a common set of tools, teams can work together more effectively and build more integrated and reliable automated test systems.
Okay, standardization for the win. What about the data and environments you need for testing? It seems like that could be a whole other can of worms.
Absolutely. If your testing environments are inconsistent or unreliable, you can end up with inaccurate test results, which defeats the whole purpose of continuous testing.
Right. It's like trying to bake a cake with a wonky oven. You never know if it's going to turn out right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the solution here is to use something called infrastructure as code, or IAC.
Infrastructure as code? What's that?
Basically, it means managing your infrastructure and things like servers, networks, and your testing environments by writing code instead of manually setting everything up.
So it's like having a blueprint for your testing environment.
Exactly, and this allows you to spin up identical environments whenever you need them, ensuring that your tests are running in a consistent and reliable setting.
So it's like having a recipe for your testing environment.
Precisely. Okay, we've talked about speed tools and environments. What about security? Is there a risk that security testing might get overlooked in a fast-paced DevOps world?
That's a good question because security is super important.
It is, and when teams are focused on releasing software quickly, there's definitely a potential risk that security testing might not get the attention it deserves.
So how do you bake security into this continuous process without slowing things down?
The answer is to integrate security testing early and often throughout the entire development pipeline.
So it's not just a final check at the end?
Exactly. This approach is often called DevSecOps. It's essentially about making security a core part of every stage of the DevOps lifecycle.
So DevSecOps is like DevOps, but with a security hat on.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It means incorporating automated security scans, vulnerability assessments, and other security-focused tests right alongside your regular functional and performance tests.
So you're shifting left with security as well, addressing it early on.
Exactly. And finally, our sources touch on a couple interesting ideas for the future. One is adopting a test-first mindset.
Test-first mindset. What's that?
It's the idea that before you write any code for a new feature, you first write the tests that will verify that the feature works correctly.
So you're basically writing the test before you write the answer.
Yeah, it can seem a little counterintuitive, but it can really help clarify the requirements for the feature and ensure that the code you build is actually testable.
So it's like having a clear goal in mind before you start the race.
Exactly. And the other forward-looking idea is the potential of AI-driven testing tools.
AI getting involved in testing, that's fascinating.
These are tools that can help automate the creation of tests, identify patterns in test failures, and even suggest new test cases that developers might not have thought of.
So AI could help us test even more effectively.
It could, and it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Okay, so to sum up, it seems like DevOps and continuous testing are two sides of the same coin.
They're deeply interconnected, and when done well, they lead to much better software quality.
And it's not just about speed, it's about building quality into the process from the very beginning.
Exactly, and maintaining that quality throughout the entire life cycle of the software.
So it's a different way of thinking about software development.
It is. It requires a shift in how teams collaborate, the tools they use, and the overall processes they follow.
So for those of you listening, think about this. We've talked about how important continuous feedback and proactive quality checks are in software development. But what about other areas of your life?
Yeah. Could you apply these principles to other things?
Exactly. Like, could you incorporate regular testing or review steps earlier in a project you're managing or a presentation you're preparing, maybe even a personal goal you're working towards?
It's an interesting thought experiment,
It is food for thought.
for sure.
Thanks for joining us today.
It was a pleasure.
And happy testing, everyone.
Happy testing.